Hey folks, how are you? I would like here to make a fairly short video link for you guys who are studying respiratory physiology to talk a little bit about the ventilation perfusion coupling. And I like to put this example here. Many of you young generation will not even know what this movie is. It's called Modern Times, and it's by Charlie Chaplin, and in which he was putting like bolts in a factory, and there is a chain going on. So he cannot control the speed at which the chain is passing the things that he needs to twist, the bolts that he needs to twist and tighten. And so if you imagine that this is the same thing as your the relation between the blood flow and the ventilation in your lungs, you have a blood flow that is going on a belt here. So imagine this would be the capillaries, and this is the work that needs to be done on the blood, which is an exchange of gas. And the last thing you want to do is having the speed of the belt going too fast, because there is no way the oxygen is going to be able to perform its function, sorry, not to perform its function, but to establish the new gas distribution, because the blood is passing too fast. So it will end up that the blood is exiting the capillaries, the respiratory capillaries, and will be not completely oxygenated. And it will have quite a bit of carbon dioxide. So you would like to make sure that the speed at which the blood is passing through is appropriate to the amount of ventilation that's existing and allowing the exchange of gases to happen. Does that make sense? So if we reverse it also, if the flow of the blood is going too slow, then there will be excessive tightening on the bolt, because now the bolts are staying for too long time. And instead of just giving it a second squeeze, now you're giving it maybe 2 second squeeze. So if we translate that into the oxygenation and the exchange of gas, you don't want to have over oxygenation of the blood, and you definitely don't want to remove all the carbon dioxide, as we studied and we will study later on in the central control of the respiration. The carbon dioxide is an essential stimulant for your respiratory system. So we would like to keep some carbon dioxide, and when we get to the gases and the partial pressures, we will realize that you don't get rid of all your carbon dioxide, you leave quite a bit behind. So what I'm trying to tell you here is that the speed at which the blood flows through the capillaries needs to be appropriate to the force, or that's applied here by Charlie Chaplin, but it will be appropriate to the amount of air and the exchange of gases that exist at that particular area. So why do we have that? I mean, you would think that in the lung, all the blood flows, and the air also flows in a very proportionate way, that it's always equal. No matter where in the lung, you have equal air and equal blood flow. Well, let's think about that for a second. If you imagine the lung, and the lower portion of the lung will have higher gravity, right? And by higher gravity effect on the blood vessels, that means the lower portion of the blood, if left uncontrolled, will receive more blood flow. Does that make sense? Because from the pulmonary artery, the blood would rather go down rather than going up, right? So if it's left without control, the lower portion of the lungs will be receiving more blood. Conversely, the upper portion of your lungs will be receiving more air. So now we are putting more air on the apical portion of the lung because there isn't that much blood and it's easier for the air, which flows always up, to go to the top of the lung, whereas the bottom of the lung will have more blood but no air, right? And that's maybe a more exaggerated example, but in all over the lungs, you will have lobes that are not necessarily getting enough blood, and they're getting a lot of air, and you want to appropriate the amount of air to the blood flow. How do you do that? That is your ventilation perfusion coupling. So imagine a situation if this is the case, right? So Charlie Chaplin is trying to tighten the bolts here, and the belt is going too fast, right? And so there are two things he can do. Either slow down the belt, and therefore he will have more time to tighten the bolts, or increase his own speed, right? So conversely, if the belt is going too slow, again, he or his manager will have the option. Do I speed up the belt, or do I tell him to slow down so now he doesn't have to tighten the bolts too hard? That's essentially what ventilation perfusion coupling. So if we look at the regulatory mechanisms involved in it, so here is a situation where you have too much blood flow and it's much greater than the airflow, the ventilation, and I want to appropriate the two to each other. I want them to be coupled with each other. So remember this, that the problem here that is the blood is flowing way too fast and now it's not getting enough oxygenation. If we are allowing the blood to go way too fast and there isn't enough air in that particular area, so here's what will happen. You will have more carbon dioxide in the area because you didn't get rid of that, and lower oxygen in the area because you did not have enough time to oxygenate. Remember the example with Charlie Chaplin, the belt is moving too fast, so the bolts were not being tightened very well, right? So there isn't enough oxygen in the blood vessels. So let's see what those effects will have, right? Initially, the carbon dioxide will have an effect on the bronchioles. The carbon dioxide, the increased amount of carbon dioxide, will allow the smooth muscles in the bronchioles to relax. If you relax the smooth muscles of these terminal bronchioles, so now you have dilation of the local airways and reduces the airway resistance, and that will allow an increase in the airflow. And some of you will wonder, is like, how is that helping the situation? Well, you have more air. With the increased amount of blood you already had, more air will match the increased amount of blood, so now you have a coupling between the ventilation and the perfusion, right? So carbon dioxide was only one of the players. Now the other player is your oxygen. Now in oxygen, you have lower amount of oxygen, obviously because you did not permit enough interaction between the blood in the capillaries and the air inside your alveolar space. So now lower oxygen in that area, what is going to do? It's going to allow the contraction of the local pulmonary arteriolar smooth muscles. So now if you contract the arteriolar smooth muscles, there will be less flow. Remember we said that we can slow down the belt? And if there is less flow, we're not talking about the whole lung, we're talking about this area in the lung that is having way too fast blood flow and it's not coupled with the air ventilation. So what should we do? We slow down the belt. How do we slow down the belt? Constrict the arterioles. If you constrict the arterioles, then the blood flow is going slower. If the blood flow is going slower, the existing amount of air inside that particular area will be enough for that slow flow of blood, and therefore now you have appropriate ventilation. So this is one example in which you had too fast of a blood flow or restricted airways that was not enough. Either way, there wasn't enough coupling between the ventilation and the perfusion. So either there is maybe a localized problem in that area where the ventilation and the perfusion is not working well, or it's a more of general thing. In a localized effect, you will have perhaps a constriction or an abscess or anything. It doesn't have to be a disease, just normal variation that will allow the ventilation and the perfusion not to be coupled with each other. Makes sense? So, in this case here, we didn't have the coupling, and the coupling may have been due to less air or faster flow. It can be either way, right? Less air or faster flow. If we go back to the Charlie Chaplin example, slower Charlie Chaplin or too fast belt. It's the exact same thing, right? So, what do we do if there isn't enough air? We allow more air to go. What do we do if the blood is going too fast? Then we constrict the arteriolar pathway, and therefore in that area the blood will slow down a little bit, right? Therefore we achieved ventilation perfusion coupling. So let's take the opposite example. Areas in the lung in which the ventilation is way too much. You have too much ventilation and it's not really coupled with the slow flow that you have, right? So now you have too much air, too little blood. What will happen? You have very little carbon dioxide, right? Because you allowed the blood to stay for too long. And if you remember, Charlie Chaplin now has tightened the bolts a little bit too tight, right? So you will have less carbon dioxide than normal because the blood had more interaction with the air, right? And if there is less carbon dioxide than normal, then that will induce constriction or contraction of the bronchial muscles. And that will reduce the amount of air entering to your area, right? And therefore, now I have balanced the thing. Remember, the problem here was that too much air, too slow blood. Too much air, too slow blood. So what do? Reduce the air, increase the blood. Flow, not amount, flow, speed. The speed of the blood will go faster, like the belt in Charlie Chaplin's case. So what do we do here on the other end? The problem we have is that we have too much oxygen. Oversaturation of my blood. So that will sound a signal to the arterioles and say, listen, the pulmonary arterioles will say, listen, we have too much oxygenation, so what should we do? Well, relax the arteriolar walls, and now you have a faster flow of the blood. Now with the faster flow of blood and reducing the airflow, the idea is to balance the two with each other to have appropriate ventilation that is coupled with the amount of flow or the speed of the flow passing through the capillaries. Get it? So, in this case, your lung as a whole, in each of those lobes and areas, whether it's apical or basal, you will always have this coupling between the oxygenation and the exchange of gases to the perfusion, which is the flow of the blood through that part of your lung, right? And that will ensure always that no matter where it is, you will have always the same amount of exchange that's happening in your lungs, again, no matter where it is. Make sense? We call that ventilation perfusion coupling. And it's a great system in your lung to ensure, like we said, the appropriate exchange of gases to the appropriate blood flow through the capillaries. Sounds good? This is what I wanted to share with you because I thought it's a little demanding and we may not have enough time in the lecture to describe it in greater details, but such an interesting and important event that I wanted to emphasize with you. So I'm going to post this for you now, and I will make a couple of more videos that hopefully you will find helpful while you're studying the material. Have a great day.